I never imagined that my peaceful life in an American suburb would turn into a battlefield because of a neighbor obsessed with rules. My name is Ethan Carter. I'm a graphic designer who works from home, and I live in Pinewood Grove, a quiet, gated community on the outskirts of the city. At least it was quiet until Linda Harper arrived. She's the president of the Pinewood Grove HOA, and what started as minor complaints turned into a personal war that pushed me to the limit. Today, I'll tell you how I faced the queen of the neighborhood and lived to tell the tale. I bought my house 4 years ago, a perfect find for someone like me who wanted peace and a place to call my own. It's a single-story house with simple lines, a small backyard where I try and fail to grow herbs, a cozy porch with a hammock I use to procrastinate deadlines, and a garage that I turned into a chaotic studio, picture piles of sketches, cans of cold coffee, and a flickering monitor that works when it feels like it. Pinewood Grove was my safe haven, the kind of place where you know your neighbors by their dogs' names. Everything was great, almost idyllic, until Linda Harper pulled up in her shiny black SUV next door about 18 months ago. She's in her 50s, the type of woman who looks like she walked straight out of a golf apparel catalog with perfectly styled blonde hair and a fake smile that never reaches her eyes. Her SUV, which, by the way, she washes every morning like a sacred ritual, has a custom license plate that reads Lady HOA. When I first saw her stepping out of her car with a clipboard and a thermal coffee mug that probably cost more than my blender, I thought, okay, new neighbor, maybe she bakes cookies or something. Oh, how wrong I was. It didn't even take 3 weeks for reality to hit me, more like getting smacked in the face. It came in the form of an official HOA letter, shoved into my mailbox. The crime? My fence, which I had proudly painted white one inspired weekend, was 5 centimeters taller than the sacred regulation limit. 5 centimeters. I replied with a polite email, promised to fix it, and even used a ruler to prove my point. I thought that would be the end of it. Then came the second letter. Linda claimed that my dog Max, an 8-year-old golden retriever who spends 90% of his day either sleeping or begging for treats, was barking too much. Funny thing is, Max is so quiet that I once had to check if he was still breathing. I ignored the complaint, assuming she'd drop it. Big mistake. I adjusted the fence using a borrowed saw from my neighbor across the street, who, by the way, warned me to watch out for the neighborhood dictator, and went on with my life. But Linda? She was just getting started. That woman with her hot pink nails and a stare that could make a hawk retreat had decided that I was her personal project, and I had no idea that the worst was yet to come. It wasn't long before Linda's complaints turned into an avalanche, an endless flood of notes and emails that I started calling royal decrees. My grill, a rusty relic I used for making poorly cooked burgers on weekends, was too visible from the street, as if I had set up a stadium-sized barbecue in my front yard. The Christmas lights I left up until January because, let's be honest, taking out a ladder to remove them is a nightmare. Unacceptable, according to the gospel of Linda Harper. Even my car, a 2012 blue Honda Civic with a charming scratch on the door, became her next target. Apparently, it didn't match the aesthetic of the neighborhood. I didn't even know Pinewood Grove had an official vehicle color palette. Each complaint came with a personal visit from the queen of the neighborhood. She would knock on my door with the grace of a court officer, holding her clipboard like a royal scepter, and flash me that rehearsed smile while saying, "Ethan, dear, it's just about maintaining Pinewood Grove standards, you understand, right?" Her tone was so condescending that I wanted to reply, "No, Linda, I don't understand why you think my Honda is a threat to civilization." But I swallowed the sarcasm, nodded with a sure, and tried to keep the peace. After all, I'm a graphic designer, not a gladiator. Over time, though, it became clear that Linda wasn't interested in order. She wanted absolute control, as if Pinewood Grove was her kingdom and I was a rebellious peasant. The breaking point? An email I received at 2:17 a.m. Yes, I checked the time because who the hell is up at that hour? Informing me that my trash bins had stayed on the curb exactly 45 minutes longer than allowed after collection. I nearly replied asking if she had installed a camera with a built-in stopwatch, or if she spent her nights staring out the window with binoculars and bitter coffee. Who lives like this? Who turns trash bins into a life-or-death issue? Linda Harper, apparently, and I was starting to realize that being polite wasn't going to save me from this war. Things finally exploded on a rainy Thursday afternoon, the kind of day where the sky seems to dump buckets of water. Just to remind you that the universe has a cruel sense of humor, I was in the middle of an online meeting with an important client, headphones on trying to explain why his logo didn't need a neon gradient, when a loud, persistent car horn shattered the peace. Not a polite honk, no. It was the kind of horn someone holds down like they're performing an exorcism on their steering wheel. I dropped my mouse, muttered a "be right back" to my client, and stepped outside to see what the hell was going on. And there it was. Linda's shiny black SUV with the Lady HOA plate gleaming even in the rain, parked right in the middle of my garage. Not on the street, not in the driveway. Inside my garage, occupying the exact spot where I usually park my Honda to avoid getting drenched while unloading groceries. Before I could even open my mouth, the dark-tinted window rolled down with an electric hum, and there she was. Sunglasses perched on her nose despite the grey weather, flashing that fake smile I had come to despise. "Ethan, my driveway is flooded from the rain," she said, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. "Your garage was empty, so I figured you wouldn't mind." I blinked, rain dripping from my hood, trying to process the sheer audacity of this woman, my garage, my property, and she was acting like I was a public parking lot. "Linda," I started, keeping my voice steady despite the anger rising. "This is my property. You can't just park here without asking." She rolled her eyes. Yes, she actually rolled her eyes and let out a dramatic sigh. "It's a community emergency, Ethan. Be a good neighbor." Her tone was so patronizing that I almost laughed, but my frustration won out. "Linda, please move your car, now," I said, pointing to the street like she was a lost puppy. She stared at me for about 5 seconds, the silence broken only by the drumming of the rain on the SUV's hood. Then, with a huff that sounded like an irritated horse, she shifted into reverse, hit the gas harder than necessary and, splash, sent a wave of dirty puddle water straight onto my pants. I stood there, drenched, watching her SUV glide back, onto the street like she was the victim in this situation. I walked home dripping wet, finished my client meeting while apologizing for the external noise, and thought my day couldn't get any worse. Wishful thinking. That night, as I dried my pants with a hairdryer and mentally cursed every decision that led me to live in Pinewood Grove, my email pinged. It was from the HOA, of course, the subject: "Proposal for a new rule, emergency parking in shared properties." The text stated that in cases of community necessity, neighbors could use each other's garages with implied consent. Guess who signed the document? Linda Harper in bold letters with a digital stamp that practically screamed, "I'm in charge here." At that moment, staring at the screen, I knew this wasn't just a neighborhood dispute anymore. This was a declaration of war. A week later, I thought I had seen the worst of Linda Harper. I was wrong. I came back from a quick grocery run, just bread, milk, and a bag of Doritos to reward myself for surviving the week, and nearly dropped my bags. There it was, her shiny, black SUV, the Lady HOA, parked inside my closed garage. The overhead door was wide open, as if I had rolled out the red carpet for her. On the windshield, a folded note written in purple ink with a handwriting that screamed, "I am important." "Ethan, urgent HOA meeting. My driveway is under construction. Thanks for lending me your garage day. Linda." Thanks? She didn't even ask. I stood there, the bread bag crushed in my hand, trying to comprehend how the hell she got in. Then I remembered. Years ago, when I bought the house, the HOA did a security inspection, and I, overly trusting idiot that I was, gave the garage code to the president at the time. It never crossed my mind that Linda, clipboard queen, had stored that number away like an ace up her sleeve to invade my life. Not only did she know the code, she used it without an ounce of shame. I took a deep breath, dropped my groceries on the porch, and decided this had gone too far. I shut the garage door with her SUV still inside. The little remote button had never brought me so much joy. Changed the code to something she'd never guess. Goodbye, 1234. And sent her a short but firm text, Linda, this is trespassing. Let me know when you're back so we can resolve this. Then I sat on the couch, opened my Doritos and waited for the fireworks. 3 hours later, loud knocks pounded on my door like a retired boxer looking for a comeback fight. It was her. Of course. Linda Harper in the flesh, her face as red as a ripe tomato, sunglasses dangling from her neck and clipboard in hand like she was about to find me on the spot. Open the garage now, Ethan, she shouted, her voice shaking with rage. This is vehicle theft. I can call the police. Calmly, I crossed my arms, leaned against the doorframe and replied, No, Linda, this is the consequence of you invading my property. You want to talk about the police? Let's see who explains it better, me defending my space or you entering without permission using a code you were never supposed to have. She stared at me, chest rising and falling like she was about to explode. For a second I thought she was going to throw the clipboard at my head, but then through clenched teeth she let out a sorry that sounded more like a growl than a peace offering. Can I get my car now? She asked, her tone still sharp. I opened the garage, let her drive out, though not before she nearly clipped my side mirror in her rush, and shut the door again. It wasn't a total victory, but for the first time I felt like the neighborhood queen had tapped the brakes, at least for now. After the garage incident, I thought Linda would back off, lick her wounds and leave me alone. Wishful thinking. Days later she declared war, not with tanks or grenades, but with the deadliest weapons in an HOA president's arsenal, paperwork and gossip. A formal notice from the HOA arrived in the mail, printed on letterhead that smelled like cheap ink, informing me that my garage studio, my creative sanctuary with its doodled-up walls and a coffee maker that had seen better days, violated new community zoning regulations. The kicker: my garage-to-studio conversion had been approved by the previous board, stamped and signed, before I even signed the mortgage. This wasn't a mistake. This was an attack. I was furious, but I'm not one to stew in anger without action. I called James, a lawyer friend from college, the type of guy who wears a suit even to buy beer. I explained everything, the notice, the prior approval, Linda's obsession. He laughed over the phone. Ethan, she's trying to bring you down with a house of cards, and confirmed what I suspected. The HOA couldn't retroactively change rules just to screw me over. That's illegal, period, he said. Together we drafted a formal letter, packed with enough legal jargon to make my head spin, but essentially saying, keep your hands off my studio or see you in court. I sent it via email and certified mail, just to make sure Linda felt its weight. If I thought this would scare her, I underestimated the neighborhood queen. Not only did Linda ignore the letter, but she doubled down. She turned the neighborhood into a battlefield of psychological warfare. She spread rumors, the kind that slithered into porch conversations and HOA WhatsApp groups. Sarah, a friendly neighbor 2 houses down, who always gives me tomato seedlings that I somehow managed to kill, pulled me aside one evening. Ethan, watch out, she whispered, glancing around like Linda might emerge from the shadows. She's telling people you're anti-community, that you don't care about Pinewood Grove. She even tried to convince the board to fine anyone who disrupts neighborhood harmony. And guess who she used as an example? I was speechless. Anti-community? Me, the guy who helped set up tables for the 4th of July barbecue and lets the mailman rest in my shade. This wasn't about rules or aesthetics anymore. This was personal. Linda had turned our feud into a spectacle, and I was the villain in her soap opera. But I wasn't about to sit back and watch her rewrite my story. If she wanted war, I was ready to fight, with facts, allies, and maybe a little of the stubbornness she had just taught me to have. On a sunny Saturday, when all I wanted was to relax with a coffee on the porch and a podcast about design, Linda decided it was time to reignite the war. I had just come back from the backyard, where I was trying and failing to fix a leaky hose, and there it was, the shiny black SUV, the Lady HOA, parked in my driveway, as if it owned the place. No note, no warning, Not even a courtesy wave. Just her raw audacity stamped onto my concrete. This time I wasn't letting it slide. No more polite letters or diplomatic messages. It was time to act. I calmly closed the garage door. The click of the remote echoing like a warning, but I didn't stop there. I grabbed an old bike lock, hooked it onto an internal latch I had installed after the last incident, and locked everything up. Her SUV, trapped. My studio, secure. My mood, improving by the second. I sank into the couch, turned on the TV at a low volume, and waited for the inevitable return of the neighborhood queen. Hours later, with the sun dipping below the horizon, I heard the unmistakable sound of the doorbell being massacred. It was like she was trying to punch the door with her finger. I opened it slowly, and there was Linda, eyes blazing with rage, her blonde hair slightly disheveled for the first time since I'd met her. "Did you lock my car in?" she shouted, her voice so shrill that Max lifted his head from the rug. Confused. "This is illegal, Ethan. I'm calling the police right now." She waved her phone like it was a grenade. I crossed my arms, kept my voice steady, and looked her straight in the eyes. "No, Linda. Illegal is trespassing on my property. Repeatedly, I warned you last time. I'll be back at 9 a.m. tomorrow to unlock the garage. I have a delivery early in the morning, and I won't change my schedule for you. Good night." Before she could explode again, I pointed at the cameras I had installed the week before. One on the porch, another in the garage, and added, "It's all recorded. This, the messages I sent you, the HOA documents proving my rights here. If you want to call the police, go ahead. Let's see who explains better." She froze, her face shifting from bright red to a shade of purple I'd never seen before. "You can't do this," she stammered, but her tone had lost its edge, like the wind had been knocked out of her sails. "I can, and I did," I replied with a shrug. "Sleep well." I closed the door in her face, politely of course, and heard her footsteps retreating, accompanied by a huff that sounded like a defeated bull. She didn't call the police, not that night at least. And as I settled back onto the couch, with Max looking at me like I was an action movie hero, I realized the game had changed. For the first time, Linda Harper was on the defensive, and I held the cards. The next day, right at 9 a.m. as promised, I unlocked the garage and set Linda's SUV free, but not before having an extra cup of coffee to prepare for what was coming. She didn't come alone. Punctual as a Swiss watch, she showed up at my door, with 2 HOA board members in tow: Robert, a quiet man in his 60s who always wore a baseball cap, and Kelly, a mother of 2 who looked perpetually exhausted but fair-minded. "Ethan, we need to mediate this," Robert said, scratching his neck, clearly uncomfortable. Linda stood beside him, arms crossed, chin lifted like a wronged martyr. I invited the 3 of them inside, offered water, which only Kelly accepted, and laid everything out: the repeated trespassing into my garage, the ignored warnings, the 2 a.m. emails, the harassment disguised as community standards. I showed them the messages on my phone, the footage from the cameras. The moment she tried the old access code and freaked out at the doorbell was a personal highlight. And even the little purple "thank you for lending" note. Robert's jaw dropped, his eyes wide as if he had just discovered Linda was an alien. Kelly, on the other hand, sighed and admitted, almost in a whisper, "She told us a very different version, Ethan. She said you locked her car in for no reason. But this is definitely an exaggeration on her part." Linda opened her mouth to protest, but Robert raised his hand. "Enough, Linda. We'll settle this at the meeting." At the next HOA meeting, I didn't go alone. I brought James, my lawyer friend, dressed in a flawless suit and carrying a folder full of documents that practically screamed, "Don't mess with me." I sat in the front, faced the neighbors, about 30, including the curious ones, and laid out my story. I didn't need to exaggerate. The facts spoke for themselves, but what surprised me was the domino effect. Sarah raised her hand and shared how Linda fined her for planting sunflowers that were too flashy. A bearded guy, Mike, complained about an absurd fee for leaving his lawnmower in the yard. One by one, the room turned into a confession booth for the neighborhood queen's abuses. Linda, sitting in the front row, went silent, her face a mask of restrained fury. Weeks later, the verdict was in. She was removed from the board by an almost unanimous vote. Robert took over as president, promising fewer ridiculous rules, no more fines for sunflowers or trash cans, he joked, and more real dialogue. Linda didn't show up to say goodbye to her position. Instead, a for sale sign popped up on her lawn days later, the pristine green grass contrasting with the white board. On moving day, I was on the porch, watering my already dead herbs, out of habit, when the black SUV passed by, loaded with boxes. I waved, a simple, almost ironic gesture. She ignored me, eyes fixed on the road, and sped away from Pinewood Grove. The silence left behind was my victory. I didn't have to shout to win. Today, Pinewood Grove breathes easier, almost as if the neighborhood decided to take a break from the chaos. Just in case, I still keep an eye on my cameras. After all, you never know when things might turn upside down again. My experience with Linda taught me a lesson I won't forget. Some neighbors don't care about harmony. They just want control, power, and to show who's in charge. But I've learned that with a little patience, some well-kept evidence, and a solid lock on the door, you can turn the game around and set things right. This whole ordeal got me thinking about how we handle these everyday battles. If you enjoyed following this little neighborhood drama, drop a like to give me a boost, and in the comments, share your own war stories with neighbors. I bet everyone has a good one. See you next time when I'll be back with another page from the Pinewood Grove Diary.